Hi, I'm Michael Appel for BizNews.com. It's a privilege and a pleasure to chat to Professor Jonathan Jansen. He's the president of the Academy of Science of South Africa and a professor at the University of Stellenbosch. Just as background, you have a CV longer than I am tall, Prof, but suffice to say, you have an incredibly distinguished career in academia across a vast array of institutions around the country and the world. So when you write something, I think it's fair to say we should sit up and listen. So let's dive in, Prof. Is South Africa as a country on the right track? Have we fallen off the tracks? Or were the tracks stolen and we're on some sort of destructive autopilot? What's your assessment?
Yeah, that's a really interesting range of metaphors. Look, we're in trouble. We're in serious trouble, and it's not that we are unfamiliar with struggle. I mean, this country's 3.5 centuries of experience is about trouble. Whether it was colonialism or segregation or apartheid, and now democracy. We suckle, and the country literally is falling apart. I mean, all these pothole stories from the 9 provinces, the collapse of the public rail system that takes ordinary people back and forth to work, the energy crisis, in fact, that just hit us as you and I started to talk this morning, the inflation, the price of food, petrol, the works. The country is literally falling apart. That in and of itself is half of the problem only. The serious other half of the problem is the complete absence of visible leadership. When Chris Hani was shot, Madiba took to television and said, "Just calm down. We're going to get through this together." Okay. We don't have that leadership. In fact, our current political leader is busy explaining how millions of dollars ended up in his furniture. So people feel, the young people I talk to, they understand we have trouble, and a lot of it is legacy trouble. What they don't understand is that it doesn't get fixed, and that there isn't a sense of it getting fixed. I'm quite happy, by the way, to lose 6 hours of electricity a day. If you told me that in 2 years' time and 3 months we'll have a plan of, you know what I mean? It's that absence of leadership in the crisis that I think people find quite debilitating.
Who or what do you blame for where the country finds itself, or is apportioning blame unhelpful?
No, I think we must blame, we must name, I think we're old enough to start naming names here. And very clearly, let's just take the energy crisis for a moment, the electricity supply crisis. We know for a fact that the experts had warned previous governments, hier kom 'n ding, there's something that's we're going to run short. They made no plans to anticipate the future. Our politics is here now politics. It isn't, planning is a foreign discipline in our governance structures. So clearly you have to blame those who were in power, which in this case is the ruling party, for not paying attention to what people were saying, years ago, that you're going to have problems with the supply of clean energy, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's more than one expert suggesting that the current regime doesn't want to privatize energy supply. I might just take the most obvious and felt pain that a lot of people live through at the moment. And if you just privatize and you said to a province like the Western Cape, find your own energy sources, and deregulate this market, immediately you begin to solve the problem. So there are political interests, God knows, perhaps also material interests, on the part of those in power not to want to solve the problem, and that, I think, is the main challenge that we face.
You've recently written that you'll be advising talented, smart young South Africans to get out of the country. Why?
It's a very hard decision because I made the decision to stay in the country and to fight because of calculations that I make that we've been in trouble before and we can overcome this demon as well. But it's very hard to tell a 20-something-year-old couple with a degree with children who are months old and 2 or 3 years old, no, you must stay when they can see the crime, affecting their families, when they can see, the deteriorating, it's not one thing. It's the accumulation of things. So when I have to get up at 4 a.m. and drive to Malmesbury to stand in a line that will serve me at 2 a.m. just to get my kid's birth registered, you see, it's that times 10 that says to this young person. So I'm saying to these kids, listen, I'll be honest with you, I don't know when we're going to get out of this rut. Go away for a few years. Get more experience, learn another language, find out how people work in other cultures, and then come back and find. Now, the reason I say that is because that's exactly what I did. Okay, as a young person, I had the opportunity to study, in the U.S. I worked very hard for all kinds of agencies in education and development. I built up what I thought was a set of skills, and then I came back and fought. Now, if at that point, and I think that was the right decision. So I think it's important for our leaders for other reasons, our young leaders and potential leaders, to just get a bigger sense of the world, and then come back and join the fight. So it's not advising them to leave permanently. It's simply saying, use this lacuna, this vacuum, this interregnum, if you wish, and just go and improve yourself. But we're going to need you back here. And by the way, most, as you know, young South Africans come back anyway. Most families come back, but they feel stronger, they feel more equipped, and they feel they can make a difference. So, yeah.
Do you believe that South African leaders in government should be looking across at what's unfolding in Sri Lanka, where President Rajapaksa resigned via email and fled to Singapore? That country's been struggling with daily power cuts and shortages of basic fuel and food and medicines. Sound eerily similar, Prof?
Yeah, look, I'm a comparativist, as far as education is concerned. So you also learn very quickly not to make, comparisons loosely. But you're right. In a broad sense, democratic governments are being toppled. Democratic leaders are being toppled. Think of Boris Johnson as a case in point in the UK system. The pressure became unbearable and he left. Think of Sri Lanka, as you said. I mean, the people in their tens of thousands just descended on this palace or whatever it is and occupied the place. I loved the fact that they were in the swimming pools and in the presidential bed and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a lovely English word we have called hutfall, and I think people have just reached this. And if I was, because we have a democratic tradition in South Africa, which makes us very different from Zimbabwe. We have strong media, we have strong, a strong sense of the right to protest, etc., etc. And I would definitely look over my shoulders if I was in government right now and saying, hey, we're looking at the very serious chance of being displaced. Now, as a Democrat, I would prefer that to happen via via elections. I think it's much less disruptive, much less traumatic for everybody concerned. And so I say to people, vote these buggers out of power. I don't often agree with Eusebius Mukasa, but he's right about one thing. If you love the ANC, vote these buggers. They've become arrogant, you see. They've become, they rest in the sense that the rural vote will keep them in power in perpetuity. With that comes the comedy acts that you see with Nathi Mtetwa, that you see with Becky Taylor, that you see with, Baleka Mbete. They're so arrogant. That they think nothing can topple them. And I think it is good for the ANC, it is good for democracy too. Now, my calculation says the ANC will definitely not get a 50% majority in the next election. That I'm clear about. We are looking at alliance politics into the future. I think that's also likely. Now, unfortunately, because our political opposition is so immature, I'm not sure that alliance politics in this country works, because as people get power, they begin to think about themselves. A very good example is the Nelson Mandela Bay metro. You saw what happened there. You have, the ANC sideline, and then there's the opposition, the alliance parties start to fight among themselves. That's a real pity, because I don't know of another strong, political party that can challenge the ANC on its own feet. Be that as it may, that shock is necessary to the ANC as a historical organization. It needs to know how to lose. Will they take this quietly? Will they go quietly? I'm not so sure. But we need to vote these buggers out of power, because we need to, I'm here in the Western Cape. I can assure you I'm not a DA supporter by a long shot. I just don't think they understand the politics of race and the history of this country. But these young mayors are making a difference. Whether it's Mackenzie up in the Karoo, former criminal, whether it is Pappas in Pietermaritzburg, or Jordan Hill, whatever his name is, here in the Western Cape. I'm impressed by these young people as mayors, because they very clearly are not bound or restricted by some party whip. They say what's in the best interest of the people. Now, what that means for me, as a hopeful person, is that we have the talent. We have the talent within all the political parties, by the way, to turn this country around. And maybe these octogenarians need to start stepping down and giving space to these young people to lead us.
Now, you've recently commented on Ian Cameron's showdown with the police minister, saying, quote, "This is a citizen." Are our ministers fit for purpose, or are they out of touch with the communities they're meant to serve? Because if you, as you mentioned, you listen to Baleka Mbete, Nathi Mthethwa, we just need a cleansing ceremony, Prof, and we'll be right as rain. Are our ministers fit for purpose?
No, they're not. I mean, and again, if you think of Baleka and Nathi and others, I mean, they've been there forever, right? And so you have this almost this expectation that you cannot be challenged. So when Cameron gets up, and I must say, I mean, very often white youth and white men in particular don't know how to speak respectfully to black people. I thought that there was nothing disrespectful. He was very, everything, his tone was correct. His criticism was on point. And he said, but man, you can't say this. Do you know what these people go through? And by the way, black people have been putting him forward, to make the case in English to these. And I can only imagine that all kinds of anxieties were going through Becky Cele's mind, about how can I be challenged by a white person in this direct way? Well, it is about time you were challenged, and that somebody said to you, you cannot, get away with murder, quite literally, and I mean, his latest thing about, we don't hire people with tattoos. Are you serious? What that means is that everybody without a tattoo is a good person, recruitable into SAPS. This is what we're left with. We're left with the dregs of leadership in our society. And so you need more Ian Camerons to get up. He didn't get up the way the EFF does in Parliament and fisticuffs. He just gets up and sort of says, logically, do you understand what people are actually going through? Your point, right? And so they are hopelessly out of touch. Remember, they're not affected by load shedding.
No, they're not.
Remember, their kids go to the best schools. Remember that they get driven around by other people, by cars that you and I pay for as taxpayers. So there is, over 30 years, a dislocation from the struggles of people, and that means it's time for change, without question.
Our economy is losing billions a day due to load shedding that's afflicted us since 2007. Do we need more or less government intervention to get us out of this crisis?
Look, I'm not a freewheeling, laissez-faire capitalist, so just so you know, but I do understand how competition improves the chances of people on the ground. So who's really, I'll tell you where my heart sinks every time the lights go out. It's a small business entrepreneur. These are actually the people that keep the economy going, right? So you got a little restaurant or a little shop in the township or something, and all you need is for that light to stay on so that you can have a business that is continuous, right? Those people lose huge amounts of, you can't put things in a fridge anymore, and if you are going to have a fridge, you're going to have to pay up front the kind of money to get a generator or to get other things, which, just given the state of revenue, the revenue flow doesn't enable you to. So I'm not talking about Pick and Pay here and Checkers. I'm talking about those people who keep the economy going as small business entrepreneurs. They simply can't survive, So again, it's the compounding effects of a whole lot of crises that put people out of business. So, these guys barely survived COVID, right? They barely survived the pandemic. Then you get clapped by the electricity disruption. Then, it's all of those things together that then also impact, as you know, on the price of goods and services and the price of delivery of those things via in transportation, and all of those things together have a devastating effect on the economy. I don't work in small business. I don't work, I'm a person at a university and so on. But I can see also with my family members who are in business how they suffer, as a result of these disruptions.
Our president hasn't as yet come out with any explanation for money laundering, kidnapping, torture allegations he's facing, other than to say, let the investigations unfold. Are we as citizens owed more than that? And my second part of that question is, Mavuso Msimang, the ANC veteran, has said Cyril needs to step aside and that this entire Phala thing is an albatross around his neck. Fair assessment?
No, I have a huge respect for Mavuso, and I think he's one of those people that could really steer this country, just given his skill set and his ethics, and there's many like him, and so on. But on this one, we must be really, really careful to think. First of all, I do think the president must be held accountable, and I do think he should be, that he's getting away with stuff. But don't think that the problem is now systemic. And so if you individualize it around him, or around Zuma or around, anybody else, and think that if you just replace them, this is not the British Parliament. You can replace Johnson with a Starmer, and I do think you will have a fundamentally different kind of politics. But everybody steals in this government. Everybody is implicated in the corruption. Everybody, if you read those the Zondo reports, nobody has clean hands, and so you could be replaced by somebody worse. He could be given the politics of the day. So I'm not sure getting rid of him. I still think he must be held accountable, but don't play musical chairs here, because I don't think we're in a state that we're going to get anybody that can turn the ship around quickly.
Let's change tack and discuss education, something you are intricately familiar with. Basic education. We spend more as a percentage of GDP than a lot of countries around the world, yet we're consistently ranked as the worst or amongst the worst. What are we doing wrong, Prof?
I think a lot, but let me just take a few that could move the needle quite quickly. Last night I had a fascinating discussion with the head of education here in the Western Cape, where I now live after many years, and he said something that I thought was quite fascinating. He says, I'm not going to do what every other head of education does, or every other, and that is focus on the matric results. I'm shifting the entire focus in terms of resources and so on to the foundation years. Do you know how long I've waited for somebody to say that? That you are not going to build a strong education system unless the foundations of education, literacy, numeracy, science and mathematics are strong. When those things are strong, you then build into. Now, of course, he could lose his job, because in the minds of South Africans, what matters is the measurement of change. Sadly, these politicians like Angela Sheikh and others have misled us into thinking that the measure of the health of the school system is the matric results. No, very few kids get to matric. Half of them drop out along the way for various reasons. And so the measure of health of the system is how many children start well and how many of them continue further. So one way to fix this thing is to put all the political and material attention, resource attention, at building strong foundations. Not sexy politically. It really does, takes a decade or so to show concrete results, but it's the way, let's think Asian, as I often tell people, as opposed to thinking South African, which is how do you build the system over a decade or two. So that's the first thing that you've got to do. The second thing we've got to do is, at the heart of all these dilemmas is the teacher. Now, South African teachers are very courageous. I have huge respect, but we also need to be honest about things. Many of our teachers in the most needy schools simply do not have enough subject matter knowledge and enough what we call pedagogical knowledge. In other words, the ability to know enough science or whatever, but also to be able to teach it to young people in a way they can understand. That is our problem. Okay? Now, every model that we've had so far for empowering our teachers to teach well has failed. We started off in the early years of democracy with something called the cascade model. That was a disaster, thinking that the message comes from top to bottom, unfiltered. Big mistake. We have models that work, okay? And one of the most important models that work is to make sure that the teachers in the underserved schools have mentors that work with them in the classroom. It's more expensive at the front end, but it is more durable in the long run. And you say to that teacher, give you an example. The way I, as a biology teacher, they call it life sciences today, the way I learned to teach was not my BSc degree. The way I learned to teach was to watch expert teachers teach the difficult parts. And I'd sit in my own classroom, and they would teach the kids. That way, I knew how to do it at a level, that connects with children. But I needed that personal mentorship of an amazing guy. So we can do this, okay, but we've got to change the model. So get the teaching plan right in the first instance. That for me is key, and start at the bottom, and already the system will begin to transform.
Now, from a tertiary education perspective, the unemployed graduate statistic, this is from Stats SA, is 22.4% for those aged between 25 and 34. Unemployed youth from 15 years of age to 24, that's at 64% if you look at Stats SA. Is this a ticking time bomb for us?
Not for graduates. I think we need to moderate that, and I've looked at that data very carefully over the years. The fact is, you have a better chance of getting a job if you have matric as opposed to not having matric. An even better chance if you have a first degree than if you have no degree. An even better chance if you have honors and masters than if you know what I mean. So in South Africa, the individual rates of return to education are still, in fact, it's the highest in the world. Quite apart from the social rates of return, the individual rates of return are quite high. So there is an argument for education. Then if you break down who's being unemployed, it depends very much which university you studied at. And we don't like to say this because you don't want to distinguish the elite universities from the rural, universities. But it's the truth. Students at UCT get employed. Students at Stellenbosch get employed. Students at Wits get employed. But the more you go into the rural universities, where very often, not always, very often the degrees are dubious. Let's be honest with that. University of Zululand has had one scandal after the other about the selling of fake qualifications, especially in teacher education, to thousands of students. Now, of course, you're going to be bloody unemployed, and so on. So the trick is to make sure that you work with the bottom 50% of our universities where there are serious problems with the quality of the degrees, and make sure that you restore the credibility of those qualifications so that when the student walks into the marketplace, they are marketable, etc. Having said that, for all students, whether they are at the elite universities or the rural universities, it is important for us as universities to say, how do you prepare young people for the workplace? So I'm working with a bunch of young first-year women students at the moment with a team. So this young woman, for example, wants to study actuarial science, right? Now she will get really good training at Stellenbosch University in actuarial science, but I've arranged with a firm that every holiday, university holiday, she will work as an intern, in an actuarial environment, whether it's Sanlam or whatever. Well, this in her case it's Sanlam, so that by the time you get your degree, you know what the workplace looks like. We don't do that in South Africa. These kids take off. I don't know what they do in these summers and winters, and that's why their CVs look so ridiculous. So as you know, I've written about this and sort of say, how do you make sure that alongside the formal degree training, you have real internship experience in the industry in which you wish to work? Those two things need to be brought together, and then but there's no lack of opportunity for graduates. I think it's a different problem for those who are out of work and out of training and out of, so that's a different debate.
Is there too much emphasis placed on going to university in South Africa and not enough on trade schools, for example, plumbers and, welders and so on?
I completely agree, but there's a good reason why kids go to university. So first of all, historically, as you know, working with your hands, which by the way is a misnomer because you're actually working with your head in today's vocational fields. But this notion of this is for inferior people, this is for black people, this is for Wood speaking here about, why teach a black kid mathematics. It wasn't that they were not teaching mathematics. It's the messaging system that said white kids do, medicine, engineering, and black kids do, social work and education. Big mistake. So we still left with that legacy. But it can be overcome quite easily if you provided technical and vocational colleges that actually have three things which they don't have at the moment. One is highly skilled technicians teaching the students. Do you know who's teaching in our technical colleges? People who don't get jobs in universities, dropouts from schools. Teachers from, how the hell does a teacher from a school teach in a technical environment? Are you mad? Secondly, you don't have state-of-the-art equipment. So if you're going to work as a, automotive mechanic, you better have the latest technology. We don't have that across the technical colleges. And number three, you need a culture in those colleges that values, high-level technical and vocational work. So if I look at a rural TVET college in Bazana and I see what's going on there, of course I'm going to go to Fort Hare as opposed to, the technical colleges. So conceptually, you're right. We need to have 2/3 of our students going to technical colleges. Unfortunately, it's not attractive enough.
Now, I spoke to Chris Palm yesterday. He's the chief risk advisor at the Institute for Risk Management. They've put out a report, a risk report. He believes we're on a slippery slope to failed statehood, and we've been on it for the last 6 years. All the metrics are going in the wrong direction. Are we the proverbial frog in the boiling pot, or are there green shoots that we can leverage to break the shackles of the downward spiral all the metrics say we're on?
No, we can break this. Remember, as I said in this article of mine, there's a lot of things that we're doing right. We have a well-regulated banking system, thank God. We have remember this is a country in Africa that sent its president to prison. Okay, whether it was for 2 days or not is irrelevant. The fact that you could send a highly popular president to prison is a statement about independent judiciary, and that, thank God for that, right? We have some of the best universities in the world. Our top 6 or 7 universities are ranked very highly. We have some of the top schools in the world, etc., etc., etc. And we have, our media, they're not easily cowed, by political bullies. And so we are very lucky in the sense that we have a lot of things that we can learn. What we need is political leadership that is not corrupt, that is not captured, that can make these institutions work for the benefit of all our people. If we can just do that, If you can just buy trains that fit on the railway track, for God's sake, I mean, you begin to already shift the needle for people who are then not left. If you can just have a rail system that means you're not over-reliant on trucks, to break up the roads between Joburg and Durban, for example, between the ports and the mining cities, then you're already shifting the needle, But that requires a political leadership that puts the people first, and we don't have that at the moment.
It's so true what you say, Prof. The fact that you and I can discuss a sitting head of state facing allegations of money laundering, kidnapping, torture, and we are not dragged out of our houses at night, and that this piece will air without a doubt. There's nobody who's going to stop that. We can't take that for granted.
Oh, no, my God. I lived in Zimbabwe, not lived, but I mean, I did my doctoral fieldwork there. And I've been through a fair number of African countries. We've got progressive policies on gay rights. Thank God for that. I mean, can you imagine being in Uganda as a gay person? Can you imagine being in Zimbabwe? I mean, one of my colleagues here at Stellenbosch has just moved to Rhodes. A father, Judge Blackie, took on one of the senior politicians in Zimbabwe. They threw him in prison. So we must be grateful for these freedoms, but we must understand there's a purpose behind those freedoms, and that is to enable us to have a stronger democracy, not to rest on our laurels and pat ourselves on the back. It is to make this country work for all its people.
Professor Jonathan Jansen, what a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you, sir.